Have you guys ever wondered what it would be like to date a 3 foot tall elf with an affinity for money and boot? Wait, hold on. I can make Bakugo look like he's on the mic. Have you guys ever wondered what it would be like to date a 3 foot tall elf girl with an affinity for money and booze? Yeah, I'm surprised that anime hasn't taken that route either. I figured that that's free real estate. Just imagine that scenario where, say, you're on the hunt for a leprechaun, right? And then you find her, you catch her, and she's like, hey, if you let me go, I'll give you all my gold. And you just do a wall down on her, just like, no. I don't want the gold. I want you. It's just... okay, no. Last time I tried to seduce you, I promise. Hi, welcome to this series where I tell you why it's a bad idea to date feminine cryptids, and where you will tell me you're probably going to do it anyway, now that I've given you an idea. If you're new to this series, what I usually do is I give you the history of the monster girl in question, that as it exists in our world, because I try to take the actual one, not the one that anime has bastardized and turned into a cute moe character, which is totally fine, and I adore that as well. I then summarize by giving you the powers that she has so that you could weigh the risk for yourself, whether you could think, huh, she can shapeshift, well that's pretty cool. Oh, she knows magic? That's awesome. She seduces men and sucks out their life force? Probably not for me, just that sort of thing. And then I follow that up with how I think society would treat them if there was just an entire race of leprechauns in this case that were just introduced to our world. I tell you what I think, how I think society would react. And then I finish it up with my personal thoughts on the leprechaun, if I would date her, and if I would, how I would go about doing so. Which, it's gonna be some pretty neat improv. I have not given it thought up until now, so this is gonna be fun. And as always, before I start with the information portion, I'd like to say I am not a solid researcher. I'm just a monkey noodle brain YouTuber that has an opinion on the leprechaun and some facts he found on the internet that might not be entirely correct, so don't burn me at a stake for this. I am not responsible. I'm also not responsible for anybody who goes after a leprechaun as the result of this video, and if you do happen to catch one, don't stick it in a mason jar. So without further ado, let's begin with the leprechaun. So the leprechaun can be traced back as far as written history itself. It is Celtic in nature, and its origins suggest that they started out as pixies and sprites, just as a collection of these little people that kind of ran the island before humans got there, before humans eventually did get there, and took the place over. Now, the leprechauns themselves, while still being a part of the pixie little people sprite family, it's said that they were thrown out of it because they were vulgar and because they were very outlandish, and I want to... American isn't the right word, but it's so close to what I'm after here. They were fairies that got kicked out for being too mischievous, let's put it that way. And rather than form their own tightly knit community of leprechauns, they kind of became more isolationist and lived by themselves, but had interests that related to other people of their kind. And now would be a good time to mention that the leprechaun comes in many color and variety. So it's sort of like us, right? Human beings. There are Asians, Europeans, Africans, Americans, etc. So you have multiple races of leprechaun that do different stuff depending on the name that you look up. For example, you have one race of leprechaun referred to as the Chloricon that's very good at drinking. You also have another race referred to as the Red Darik. I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm sorry. That is known to be more of an impractical jokester. Some even go through wardrobe changes depending on what type of leprechaun you look up. For example, one specific leprechaun might be known to dress in red, another one might be known to have long, scraggly beards, and some of them might even dress in green and have obsessions with treasure and gold. This will become an important factor later, so keep in mind that there are multiple different leprechauns out there. But, much like Comey can't communicate, good things must come to an end eventually. And so the little people that inhabited the British Isles were eventually pushed out by another race of little people referred to as the Fir Bolg. Now, here's where I will admit an oopsie. I don't know if the Fir Bolg discovered Britannia, just uninhabited, so they were the pixies and they were the fairies that took over the land, or if they took it from other sprites and fairies that had already existed there prior. but I do know that the Firbolg made their presence known on Britannia and existed there for quite a while before they were eventually kicked out by the Tuatha Dé Danann. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hold on. The Tuatha Dé Danann. Yeah, these guys are cool. So, the Tuatha Dé Danann are supernatural beings in Celtic mythology that were kicked out of heaven for essentially being too smart. They were they were too good at the game, and they were also really skilled with magic, so the Firbolg never stood a chance. But as soon as they got to the British Isles, they made a capital out of the island of Ireland and spread their influence to the rest of the British Isles from there. But they were renowned for their artistry, for their craftsmanship, and they would build monuments under the water and on land. By some accounts, it's suggested that the people of Ireland actually originate from the Tuatha Dé Danann, and I mean, I don't know if they could still use magic, but at the very least, their majesty comes from them. So yeah, the people of the Isles really respected them, and did so all the way up until the last Tuatha Dé Danann leader had passed on, leaving the Isles just to their own devices. And from then on, that's when humans start to enter the picture, where they walk into the British Isles and they're like, oh wow, look at all this mystical, undeveloped land. We can live here. So as more and more of them come to the Isles, less and less of the little people, the pixies, the fairies, the leprechauns, are in existence, and so humans become the dominant species of that territory. Now, of course, that is a legend, and unless you have your own time machine, D-mail, etc., you can't really confirm that for yourself. But what we can confirm is that actual written documentation of beings that can be described as leprechauns can trace all the way back to the 8th century, starting with a story referred to as Adventure of Fergus, son of Ledi. And no, I'm not going to be pronouncing the actual name. The story goes that King Fergus is returning home after a long day of conquering stuff. So he's sleepy, he's tired, and he falls asleep on a beach looking out at the ocean, to which when he wakes up, he finds that 3 little people that he refers to as Lepre-chan are pulling him towards the ocean, presumably to drown him. So in one fell swoop, he grabs all 3 and he just pulls them close and says, hey, what are you guys doing? To which one of the Lepre-chan are like, alright, I know this is bad, but tell you what, if you let us go, we'll give you 3 wishes. How does that sound? And I'm not sure as to how the rest of the story goes, because my memory is derived from John Solo's video on it, and I think that what happened there was the king wanted to breathe underwater, so the leprechauns give him that wish and then suck on his chest or something. But regardless, that is the first written document that we have of a being that you can definitively call a leprechaun. Unfortunately for us, the Adventures of Fergus didn't really go into much detail describing what these Lepre-chan were, whether or not they, like, what kind of clothing they had, or if they had long beards, etc. We only know that they were little people, they were pygmy-sized. So that leaves little to the imagination. And from there on, the leprechaun, or I guess Lepre-chan, as it would have been referred to back then, became a funny story to tell just in taverns or to people of the area. Just a funny little folk creature that would take a ride on sheep whenever it was lazy, that would build shoes just because it practically had a fetish for it, and would drink beer. One of my favorites is that if you went down to your wine cellar and you saw that the alcohol was just lower in volume than what it used to be, people would just say, yep, the leprechaun did that. So better lock it up tight, because otherwise that's just going to keep happening. Not that evaporation or science or anything took hold. No. Little man drank my booze. And you know who else really likes stories of the Lepre-chan and their mischievous behavior? Medieval writers. And they would take the story of the Lepre-chan and put it in all sorts of directions. Some of which were darker than others. But it wasn't all negative, because a lot of the times these medieval writers would introduce some neat elements, like their obsession of treasure, or how they got it in the first place. For one, it's said that one of the legends of the Leprechaun was that when the Danes came over to invade the British Isles, they found these isolated leprechauns and just for some reason trusted them with their gold, which I don't know, but you know what? If the Vikings said that leprechauns were cool, then they're cool in my book. But then you have the flip side, where these writers would take something like their obsession of treasure and turn it into something darker, like if somebody went hunting for it, instead of getting 3 wishes from this mystical being, they would get murdered. Just straight up, just a leprechaun would kill them for it. Another example of a leprechaun that goes bump in the night is one story that was used not particularly to frighten children, but to frighten adults that don't look after their children, where this type of leprechaun, if you were not careful, would run up to the baby carriage or wherever the baby was kept, steal it, and replace it with something called a changeling, which is just a fairly ugly-looking fairy, or a fairy that can shapeshift. I'm not too certain, but that leprechaun is a baby thief. So close to a cryptid that just doesn't hurt kids. How many does that bring us up to? 5? So you got the lamia that eats them, you got the mermaid that drowns them, and now you got a leprechaun that steals them. Like, what did they do with it? If they steal kids, where do they put them? Do they eat them? Do they turn them into treasure? Like, I don't know. It's just mythical beings, man. Eventually what would happen is that these medieval writers would take these individual leprechauns, if you remember, these specific ones like the Cluacan or the Fardaric, that would have these specific traits, and they would squish them into one. That's a very odd way of putting it. They would write them into one being. So different races of leprechaun that had these different aspects about them would all of a sudden become one image of a leprechaun, just one person that only had the most memorable traits. And so the result was this unifying legend of a being referred to as a leprechaun that had a thing for drinking, an obsession of treasure, maybe a thing for shoes, and an affinity for the color green. But how did we come to celebrate this thing today? Like, how did it become the arbiter of St. Patrick's Day? Well, that largely has to do with immigration booms happening in the 1900s to America. So to give you a brief overview, Ireland had its potato famine in the mid-1800s, right? They came over to America in droves. Not just them, but a lot of Europeans, in fact. Italians, Russians, Germans, Europeans, it's just everybody coming over. And this became a really big boom in the early 1900s when you had hundreds of thousands of millions of people coming through Ellis Island into America for hopes of a better life. But you see, what happens when millions of people come from their homeland to a foreign one to start a new life, particularly a foreign land with a pre-existing population, some members of that pre-existing population don't take kindly to foreigners. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happened to the Irish as they were coming off the boat. So as more and more European immigrants moved to America by the turn of the 20th century, radical nativist groups would do everything they could to paint the immigrants in a negative light, calling them lazy and untrustworthy, and tarnishing their image any way that they could. But, luckily for the Irish, they had just the thing to help with their image problem, because if there was one thing that was preferred over xenophobia, it was a drinking buddy. More accurately, a drinking buddy that would tell legends and stories of mythical creatures that you can get in Europe, but you don't have in America. And so, with propaganda in the right places, the identity of the Irishman slowly started to become the identity of the leprechaun, that being a heavy-drinking, funny little man that you could have a good time with. He was more trustworthy, and thus that reputation gave them a brighter look in the eyes of the American people. But it is worth mentioning that this works both ways, because the nativists would take that propaganda and be like, oh, they're drunk, they're lazy, they're greedy, and they'd turn it into negative propaganda as much as they could. So a bit of a double-edged sword. But drinking wins overall. And with celebrations like St. Patrick's Day that are predominantly Irish, where Irish would parade through the streets and drink, Americans would be like, oh, wow, that's sick, let's get in on that. So they would get involved as well, and by the end of the day, the Irish people would win, if you'd call it that. Like, they were more so welcomed into the American people and were higher on the list of people to accept than other Europeans. But at the same time, we now see them as funny little drunk men. Take that as you will. I'm also not doing it favors by turning the leprechaun into a anime girl, so that's me playing my part, I guess. But that is more or less the history of the leprechaun. If you want it explained in a way that I can't, that being better, I highly recommend either Monstrum or John Solo's video on the Leprechaun, because I got a lot of my information from those two, and both of them do a really good job, especially on the more ancient aspect of the Leprechaun that I didn't really touch on, so I highly recommend watching those. But if you want to figure out how to get lucky with Lucky, look no further. So what are the powers of a leprechaun, and are they dangerous to me? That is a resounding no. They don't really present all that much of a threat. Like, with the exception of the baby-napping, treasure-obsessed murderers, they don't really have any powers that can kill you. If they have any supernatural powers, I'd say that for one, they have magic, and there are tales where they have used it in many a regard, but mostly to get their treasure back, because they are cunning little individuals, and if you do manage to catch one, a popular way that the leprechaun will try to weasel its way out of it is with a magic sack, where it will give you a coin out of said sack and say, like, oh yeah, I'll give you this if you release me, and the leprechaun would then scamper away, but when you go down to your hand, find that the coin is gone, guess where that coin went? Back to its magic sack. I think there was another legend where it used magic to disguise itself or to hide away in some place where it couldn't be found. But the magic that it uses isn't really lethal. It's just, it's used for camo, so that's a thing. The other power that I would give to it is that it is isolationist and more than capable of taking care of itself, which I'd consider that to be a superpower. I mean, being able to look after yourself just in the middle of the woods, finding your own food, guarding your treasure, and using whatever tools at your disposal. I'm sure magic makes it a lot easier, but being able to keep your mental sanity if you're living alone, that's tough. So I will give them that as well. I can't really think of any other powers. I mean, they're tiny, but that's not really a power. That's more of a skill issue. But so they're a mythological being, but they don't really do much outside of that. And with that, that includes the powers. But what does that mean for society? So if a whole tribe of leprechauns were just to come out of nowhere and say, like, hey, we're a part of your world now, how do I think that the world would react? I think it'd be a more fun world, to be honest with you. For one, the leprechaun men, incredible drinking buddies. They would be your best friends, I'm certain. Maybe a few of them would be con men, so that would be something to look out for. If they are treasure obsessed, then maybe they would try to con you out of all your money, and they'd take jobs of car salesmen or like people that are salesmen, just people that are trying to run pyramid schemes. That would maybe make life a little more challenging, but if you're smart, you can stay away from that sort of thing. Governments would probably, the IRS probably would want to know where they're hiding all their gold, to which the leprechauns probably won't give it to them. Oh, I got it. So this is what I think would happen. They would start existing, right? But then it comes out that they have this whole pile of gold that they're just sitting on. But especially in the case of the U.S., what I think will happen is that the government will start crying for leprechauns to pay taxes because they're living on U.S. soil, and they would go like, no, you can't have our gold. Like we're off the grid, so we don't live in your America technically. And that would lead to a huge scandal in which the IRS and those that they hire would try to track down leprechauns to get their gold, to which it would be a Tom and Jerry kind of scenario where they'd keep outwitting the government and getting away, but still living amongst the people. That's what I think would happen. But other than that, I don't think that would necessarily make leprechauns illegal. I don't think the government would go that far. Making things leprechaun accessible wouldn't be that hard. In some cases, it would be difficult. Like roller coasters, for one, you can only be a certain height to be on it, and I don't think leprechauns can go on it. But movie theaters, they still work. Shopping malls, they're still fine. Doors you can open just fine. I think that leprechauns would integrate pretty well. And I don't think that people would be racist towards them because, again, there's something that we've been integrated with since birth, right? We've been handling leprechauns since mom and dad threw furniture and told us that a leprechaun did it. So we're already used to them. Would society start dating the leprechaun? Absolutely. Like, for one, money. For two, leprechauns also have a charm to them. And that's actually a superpower I should have added. So I'll go back and edit that later. But some leprechauns are said to have a certain charm to them that makes them alluring, that makes them charming. There's no other word for it. That draws people to them, which you know, ironic for them because they're fairly isolationist. Then there's their personality to consider, because they're supposed to be rule breakers, just mischievous rule breakers. They're supposed to be fun and energetic, lively. They're supposed to be great drinking buddies, and they're isolationist. That's more attractive than you think. So you tell me she's petite, wealthy, and drunk. And she's lonely? So yeah, I don't think leprechauns would have a problem fitting in. But you might. But what about me? Would I date a leprechaun? Absolutely. Sure, the height difference is a little obscure. Sure, you might get the cops called on you a couple of times. Sure, people will look at you funny and probably judge you on Thanksgiving dinner. But do not let that stop you from having a good time. She is a fun woman who loves to drink, probably likes physical contact, and is magic. I mean, when you think about it, going out with a leprechaun is kind of like going out with your childhood friend, right? Those old days where leprechauns used to throw around the furniture and mess up your room while you were away. Well, now, you come back as an adult man, you stand over her, and you're like, let's go out sometime. That'll be your perfect revenge. But treat love as love. Do not seek the pot of gold at the end of her rainbow unless the time is right. Now, granted, it doesn't come without risk, because there's a small chance that she might be after me for my money, and she might try to kill me for it. But what, she's 3 feet tall? I can... No. Stop it. Get away. Don't stab me. Plus, what's she gonna do, snatch my baby? You can't snatch a baby that belongs to both of us. Plus, imagine the couples cosplay. You can do like Wizard of Oz and the Munchkin. You got Takeda and Igarashi from My Senpai's Annoying. Snoopy and Woodstock. And that thing I'm surprised about that I brought up at the beginning of the video, how come anime has not taken advantage of this free real estate? Like, 3-foot-tall elf that's wealthy, drunk, and lonely, that's somebody's ticket. That pairs with somebody. Like a VTuber with the small leprechaun hat, red hair with the curls in it, the leprechaun getup, the frills in the sleeves, the short skirt with plaid green. That's a really cute idea. If anybody starts using that VTuber model, give credit to Antagonish. I guess in the modern anime landscape, the closest thing that I can compare to a leprechaun would be Yotsuba, because she's got the green ribbons and the orange hair, and she's also just Genki. That kind of reminds me of a leprechaun. I don't know how she drinks. I'm sure that she also is a fun drunk. Imagine that, an anime girl leprechaun would stand no chance. Anime women get tipsy over just the tiniest bit of alcohol found in baked cake. I don't even know how you do that. Imagine, what, a leprechaun version of that? You'd barely get past the first pint. But that would be so cute. That would be such a good idea that needs to come to fruition. Okay, better yet, better example. Try mixing Yotsuba with Shinobu from Bakemonogatari. Despite the fact that Shinobu's a vampire, that's another video I have to do. Despite the fact that Shinobu's a vampire, I imagined her in a leprechaun getup, and it is adorable. So yeah, this whole video is just me convincing myself that dating a leprechaun's a good idea. But it's not entirely my fault. I mean, just try talking me out of it. It's not gonna go the way you think. I don't know, dude. I think it's a bad idea to go out with her, okay? She's mischievous. She only cares about money. And she's so freaking tiny. And that is all I've got on the leprechaun. If you're at this far in the video, thanks for bearing with me these last couple of weeks. I don't think I've made a video for about 3 weeks since the AMV, and the reason behind that is because I was working on something else, a side project, but after putting the footage together, I reviewed it with a friend, and we both had agreed that it was pretty cringe, and I'm glad that it didn't actually come to fruition. So we ended up scrapping that, and then I decided to make this instead. There are other videos that I want to try down the line too, but if I ever slow down, if it ever seems like I'm not releasing at the once-a-week schedule that I usually do, it's going to be because I'm working on one of those projects, and I want to make sure that I get a video that is good and not cringe, and something that I can look back on and think, wow, that's a pretty good idea for a video. So there's that. I also got another video in the works where I'm trying something more physical, and I'm doing an endurance test, and I don't want to spoil it, but every night after finishing that endurance test, it just knocks me out. So I just can't work on anything after I'm done. So I have to rely on free days when I'm not doing it, where I can make videos. And so that's just another thing. if you're curious, I won't say anything, but it has to do with my subscriber count and doing as many physical things as the subscriber count. So, you know, if you really want to help me with that, just unsubscribe from the channel. That would help me significantly because it finishes that video a lot faster. Also, tell me what you think of the new background. I wanted to try doing something where the lighting was a lot better. Now, granted, that loses the closet thing that I was going for, but I mean, if I lose that, that's fine. It is what it is. But I just wanted to test out a couple of new shooting locations, and I think that this one would be pretty good. So let me know what you think of that. Otherwise, I'd say that... Is there any other news I got? Nothing really. Oh, right. So I am going to be attending a convention in the next week, going to Cleveland Expo, and that'll be pretty fun. I'm going to try to see if I can't meet some voice actors while I'm there. If you happen to be there too, hope you have a good time. If not, well, enjoy being wherever it is that you're going to be. But that said, that's all I got for you. Sayonara, suckers.